Welcome back to the Patriot Perspective. I'm Gregory Lykov, and I'm joined here with Ofer Dar.
Hello.
And we are going to be interviewing a very special person, Dakarai Larriett. Excuse me for my pronunciation. He is currently in Alabama, candidate for U.S. Senate, and he's a Democrat. So very interesting. Not many Democrats are elected in Alabama as a whole. So it will be interesting to speak with him. I'm excited to share my time with him, and we look forward to our interview. So I'm here with my good friend and someone who is currently running for U.S. Senate from Alabama, Dakari Leonard. Larriett, sorry for pronouncing your name wrong. And we're going to be conducting an interview with him on the Patriot Perspective. Dakari, the first thing we wanted to ask you is why you chose to run for U.S. Senate and why this race is so important for you. You're a businessman. You never went into politics beforehand. Why now? Why join?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me, Gregory and Ofer. This election, 2026, is going to be so pivotal and critical for the future of Alabama and for this country. And my decision to run was really driven by personal experience last year of false arrest. And when I realized that the systems in place just were simply not working fairly for everyone, I started speaking to more Alabamians and just other people around the country. And I realized that many systems are broken. So, education, economic opportunity, healthcare. And that's really the genesis of this campaign is ensuring that everyone gets a fair shot at being great and living a successful life in this country and in the state of Alabama.
Mm.
And Dakari, if you wouldn't mind, can you expound on the false arrest and the entire background surrounding that? I know that was in April of 2024. And there was also a lawsuit related to it. And how did it inform your policy relating to police reform and crime as a whole?
Yes,
Well, thank you for asking. So, yes, it was April 10th, 2024. I was driving through Michigan and was apprehended by the police under the premise of making a traffic violation, which I attest and my lawyer attests did not happen. And then from there, the police just continued to escalate and escalate. They initially accused me of driving under the influence of alcohol. Then it became drugs. I tested negative for alcohol immediately that night after being handcuffed and taken to a local hospital. And then in the jail, I was even accused of smuggling drugs through my stomach by ingestion and was forced to use the restroom publicly in the jailhouse. And ultimately, I was released from the jail after about a day. And from there, I tried to seek justice. I demanded internal reviews. I spoke to the legal and political apparatus of the state of Michigan, all the way up to Governor Whitmer's office, and nothing was done. And after about 6 to 7 months of just fighting, 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 and not getting anywhere with it, finally, my lawyer did sue the state of Michigan and the Michigan State Police for $10 million. dollars. And that's where we are today. The initial lawsuit was thrown out due to qualified immunity. And then we appealed that, and we're now sitting in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. So that's just one step below the United States Supreme Court. And as a result of this experience, I've already started drafting policy that I want to see implemented federally. So one of my key pieces of policy is called the Motorist Bill of Rights. And essentially, that outlines what should happen during these types of traffic stops. What is a reason to stop someone? What is a fair test that's scientifically proven? And then finally, ensuring that the evidence is released to the victim, in my case, right, or the motorist, within 24 hours without redactions.
hmm And just to follow up, looking at police policy and ways of targeting crime, I looked through your platform and you did mention some interesting points that I'd like to hear about more. You talked about a pilot program or a sort of report that was done in the city of Birmingham, for instance, where they looked at ways in which they can reduce crime, but also do it in a way that is considered equitable. So, looking at like community outreach, and you talked about banning those Glock switches, as they're referred to, which turn Glocks from semi-automatic to automatic. So, as
a senator, what do you think you can do to sort of take those lessons that you learned from your own experience and from people, policymakers in Alabama, and turn it into something that's nationwide?
Yes, that's a great question. So I do think I strongly believe in states' rights, and that's something that I've already written a blog about on my page. But at the same time, some of these issues are just so critical that we've got to get some federal oversight in them. And policing is one of the most, I would say, segmented pieces of our daily lives as Americans, because you think about it, I live in Alabama. On a typical day, I could be in Atlanta. I could do a day trip and come back. I could go to Mississippi or Tennessee. Like we're, a quad state, if you will. And those interactions that happen, I don't know the rules of in Georgia versus Mississippi versus Tennessee. So federalizing these interactions, I think, is critical and something that we've got to put as a priority very, very soon. And it doesn't need to be antagonistic against the police. It's about keeping everybody safe and understanding what those rules are and what's a real reason to stop somebody and what's not. And with regard to Birmingham, Birmingham's done a lot to engage the local community. So having officers that are from the community, that are trusted, has been really critical to improving those interactions. And then also training them in terms of what is a mental health crisis versus an actual crime. That's a big opportunity. And I'm hearing more and more about actually sending calls that are mental health crisis calls to the appropriate authorities and not even the police. So just bypassing the police and getting those community-based individuals that understand this from a healthcare perspective engaged. So that's what I would like to see much more of. And then in terms of the Glock switches and things of that nature, look, Alabama is a gun state. We love our guns. I'm a gun owner here. And for me, it's recreation. For some people, it's personal safety and defense. But we can't have folks building basically automatic guns in our streets, in our inner cities.
Yeah. That makes wonderful sense. And I just want to say again, thank you so much for speaking about your personal experiences because I know that they're not always the easiest thing to speak about, and you just have such a unique story that I think the world needs to hear it. Now, to transition a little bit to what I wanted to discuss with you, which was the Google censorship. So conservative and Democrats alike has faced an issue with Google as a whole of being censored online, whether it's outlets like the Gateway Pundit or even Slate magazine. Both are very partisan, but they have been censored. You have personal experiences with Google of them not ranking you as a, senatorial candidate on their, platform. So I wanted to ask you, first off, what is your personal experience with Google and their censorship on your platforms? And my second follow-up question with that would be, why do you think that Google has these, motives? Like, what is their motives?
Well, it's interesting. Folks don't necessarily know that Google also is part of Alphabet, right? So you have YouTube, you have Google Search, you have Google Ads. So censorship can impact all of those different tools in different ways. Like, how does something rank? Is there a summary that possibly is misleading that comes up at the top when you do a search? Which videos get traction, which don't? So I think they're a for-profit organization and one of the biggest in the country and the world. I think everything's driven by profit. I think that's a pretty easy assumption. What are there some political leanings there? Possibly. But in my personal experience, it really is around getting traction just for my campaign. And when you think about Google and its market share being something like 70% plus, it's really like a town square. So we really have to think about, again, do we have the right regulation in place for something that essentially become the number one source of information for most people in this country? And in my case, I can't even rank on their platform for my own name
Mhm.
because of other quote unquote more authoritative sites, which is very odd. But if you go to DuckDuckGo or you go to Yahoo or whatever, I'm the first result for my name. And that's really important. And it has implications with regard to our democracy, our free speech. I'm in a state, for example, where it is a plus 15 right-leaning state. So I'm not getting really any traction then on my campaign, which is really critical if I'm ever going to win this election.
Yeah, and you bring up a very good point of other websites having you ranked towards the top of the search results. And I want to bring up a specific website search engine called Luxel. I do a lot of work with them, especially spreading their message because I truly believe in it. Their mission is to counteract this partisan leaning search engine of Google and to have a fair ranking system where, if your name is your name, you're the first results at the top instead of some, unrelated result. And that's what they do. But to be honest, as you mentioned, Google has a 70 plus percentage in the United States, and then worldwide they have a market share of almost 90% of all searches worldwide. And that is concerning. Now, I wanted to ask you, the Trump administration has been taking a lot of action towards newspapers like NPR and PBS to defund them, the Department of Education, and really the whole main goal behind all of that is to prevent Americans from being educated by a government-run uh, education source and prevent them from being partisan, if that makes sense. So the Trump administration didn't want a newspaper that is funded by the federal government to be educating Americans about a partisan sort of issue because it's left-leaning, for example. But Google is given, billions of dollars by the federal government. I believe even just this month, they signed a $20 billion contract. So Google is obviously a partisan player, as we just discussed, and they are getting contracts from the federal government. So as senator, I wanted to ask if you would do anything about this. Would you take upon, action of companies like Google and other search engines that are clearly partisan leaning, that are gaining billions of dollars from the federal government? Would you take action on them?
Hmm. Well, that's a tricky question because Google has such a wide range of products, and some of them are considered more like town square. This is a place where we can all share ideas and engage. And, laws have been passed to limit their culpability to public speaking.
Mhm.
So that one's tricky because I'm not sure what products or services they're providing to the government, and are they even related to anything related to like the press.
Yeah, that makes sense. And overall, I wanted to get your perspective on exactly what the Trump administration is doing with defunding papers like NPR and outlets like PBS for the same exact purpose as I was saying for partisan leaning, newspapers. I wanted to get your thoughts on it. Do you think that it makes sense? Does it not make sense? What are your thoughts?
I've looked at a number of kind of diagrams that show the more left or right leaning newspapers. If memory serves me, NPR is pretty close to the middle. They do, in some cases, I think, editorialize, but in general, that's been my experience. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that it's important to have a lot of different sources of media, and this is just one of many that's not for profit. So it gives Americans another outlet. But I think you can always get in trouble when you have state-run media that is pushing specific messaging, and we've seen that largely when we think about Russia and China and places like that. But I think NPR has been fairly consistently delivering quality media to Americans, and I think it's disappointing that they're being defunded.
And Dakarai, I just want to mention something that you talked about in one of your responses of how Google and Alphabet as a whole obviously has an interest in forwarding their profits. And the natural implication from that is that your campaign and any Democratic campaign in Alabama is naturally going to be at a disadvantage because of the political leanings in the states. So how do you, not just online, but on a practical level for the campaign, get past that barrier with voters across the entirety of the state, urban and rural? How do you bridge that gap? And it's possible, by the way. We had Doug Jones as a senator not long ago in your state, so it's certainly possible. So how do you intend on doing that?
Getting out there and being visible everywhere. And that's what I've been doing. Like just this last week, I spoke at a senior home. I was at a peaceful protest. that was actually covered by the media. Sometimes we find that more left-leaning activities in our state are just not covered. So that was encouraging to see two local stations present. And then also earlier this week, I spoke at a prison oversight committee meeting at the Alabama State House. So I'm just being very, very visible. And obviously, as the funnel starts to close and we get closer to a primary and a general election, I'm hopeful that we'll get the coverage that we deserve for this campaign.
And on a similar note, I want to ask about one of the Republican candidates in Alabama who probably has the highest likelihood of winning the primary, Steve Marshall, who's the Attorney General in Alabama right now. What do you think of his performance during his incumbency? What do you think of the policies that he's sort of espousing in relation to law enforcement? But much more than that, what do you think of his entire platform and where do you contrast with him generally?
Okay. Well, it is still very early over in this race. So we have 3 more months of qualification. So we don't know what's going to happen. And
Yeah,
you go back to 2017, Roy Moore won the Republican primary. So
right.
we don't know. There is actually a rumor that a sitting representative will be joining the race, and
Mhm.
that will be quite a challenge for Marshall. So we'll see. But to answer your question of Brown Marshall, I think it's just more of the same. Marshall has been so focused on culture war issues and not what is impacting real Alabamians here. Like, for example, being the sickest, poorest, least educated people in the country. That truly is where we need to be working. I believe just this morning or earlier this week, Marshall sent a letter stating that he wants the uh, biological women who competed against trans women to receive medals because the trans women have been, I believe, disqualified. This is how he spends his time and money.
Yeah.
He also spent a lot of time fighting, oh, not even Obama, Trump appointed judges' direction to adjust our districts, our 7 congressional districts. He just kept fighting it and fighting it, fighting it. And again, a poor use of state funds. So, what voters will see from me is someone who's going to advocate for them, who's going to follow the law and try to uplift them, not get engaged in all of these games.
Yeah. And, I wanted to transition a little bit. And thank you for talking about Steve Marshall. I know that it's so early in the race, but it's always, enjoyable to talk about opponents that you may face. So, in New York City, I discussed this a little bit in other interviews with you, but in New York City, currently we have Democratic NYC mayoral nominee Zohran Mamdani. He has won the primary, and he has very ambitious goals in his economic policy, in his general reforms that he wants to make in his education policy. I wanted to get your thoughts on him and what you thought of him as a candidate for mayor in New York, and if his ideas could actually come to fruition, not only in New York, but also around cities all around the United States.
Well, that's the beauty of states' rights in that we can experiment and try new things. And you may know that I lived in New York for about 15 years. So I'm always going to be super engaged in New York politics and understanding what's happening there. So one of the things that he's talked about that I say, hey, just give it a shot is the free buses. And I think about it from a practical standpoint of getting people from point A to point B. The buses spend so much time collecting fares. There's so many altercations when people can't pay. It's already a huge overhead for the city. MTA makes no money. Is this really an opportunity? Let's try it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, shut it down. Um, Kind of like the downtown zone and extra cost that's required to get into that, the congestion pricing.
Justin pricing, yeah.
Does it work? If it does, great. If it doesn't, move on. So I think that's interesting. The government, I believe, funded stores or operated stores. I'm more skeptical about that. I think the government does certain things very well and other things probably should stay away from. But I'm interested to see, does that improve affordability in a city that's being stricken by unaffordability? But overall, the campaign I thought was really engaging, and it inspired me to really think about how we reach more people and build a network of volunteers. I believe it was 50,000 volunteers that he was able to engage. So we've actually had meetings with the DSA here in Alabama and Mobile, and we will be looking towards them as well when the time comes to start our ground game.
Over.
Yeah. So I want to transition to charter schools and more so your view on education policy. So you talked eloquently about your beginnings in education and the way in which your mother was in public schools for decades upon decades and fought to get you into a top magnet school. So you have a very interesting perspective on the way in which various types of education, not necessarily the orthodox way of teaching, can be beneficial to certain types of students. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the sorts of policies that you'd be pushing for in the Senate in relation to education, because, for instance, in Alabama right now, there's an issue with the per pupil spending. It's 4,000 less than the national average. So there's that concern in terms of just generally performance. It is lower than the national average as well. So what would you do in relation to, for instance, school choice? Do you support the ideas of school vouchers for not just magnet schools, but also just charter schools and other types of learning like homeschooling as a whole? What is your stance on that issue?
Overall, my stance is freedom. So giving parents, giving children the opportunity to choose the best way to learn for them. And that can be magnet schools. So I went to a gifted school called WJ Christian, art schools or charter schools. And even in Alabama, for example, you know about Space Force and NASA up in Huntsville in North Alabama. We actually have an aeronautics school. So these are great opportunities, and they really represent the best in Alabama. We have a lot of work to do around ensuring that we maintain a minimum standard of education that ensures that even neighborhood schools will deliver quality outputs and results for the students. So that's where we need to work. That spending piece is indicative of the problems that we're facing here. And then we have a voucher program here in the state. We need to look at that and make sure it's doing right by all Alabamians. Some of the concerns are that as that program or law evolves over the next year or so, it's going to allow people of all income levels to take advantage of the voucher and then send their kids to private school, which they may have already been doing. So is that conducive to the results that we want? And again, it goes back to measuring and then realigning the laws to ensure that they deliver the right results. So that's really the focus, is making sure that baseline schools meet a certain standard, and then we continue supporting these Tony institutions like Alabama School of Fine Arts that are doing great work, and then take the learnings from those and cascade them around the state.
Yeah, and you bring up a very good point of making sure the right people get these learning vouchers and not, just everyone in the top 1%. But a lot of other Democrats, like Mamdani himself, are fundamentally against school choice. They believe that it takes away from public schools, which is a valid concern. What would you say to those Democrats who, in your party, are against school choice because they're threatened of its implications on public school?
I think it's just more nuanced than taking away, and I don't think it's necessarily a black or white situation. And I think it's just so unfortunate to, like, let's say that we immediately ended all school choice. What would happen the next day for people who have learning disabilities, people who already have decided, hey, I want to specialize in math and science or aeronautics? You're taking that opportunity away from them. And if we're being realistic, we know that every neighborhood school is not going to have these specialties. That's not feasible for most states or any state, really. So these specialties can exist in a system where we still support a baseline education that's great in most community neighborhoods. We're not going to be able to offer, for example, Alabama School of Fine Arts has a professional theater for theater students to perform in. You're not going to have that in every neighborhood school, but you can have a quality math and science education and ensure that those folks have a good chance in their lives here in the state and wherever they want to go.
Yeah.
Thank you. And just to transition to another pressing issue in the state of Alabama, healthcare. So this has been a big talking point in relation to the big beautiful bill because of the requirements associated with Medicaid. I wanted to get your sense on that first and foremost. Do you think that's a prudent approach to cutting Medicaid in a way that doesn't like cut the income threshold, but does cut another really critical part of it, which would be whether or not you're employed at the moment?
Mhm. Yes, it's quite nuanced, but at a high level, we estimate that the state of Alabama will lose about $300 million in funding as a result. So, regardless of your thoughts or perspectives on the work requirements, that $300 million is going to result in more rural hospitals being closed. And in fact, when I was in North Alabama this week, we drove by a hospital that had just shut down. So now these folks in North Alabama, in, I will say, the more northwest corner. They're going to have to travel all the way over to Huntsville, maybe an hour for critical care. That's the difference between life and death. And that's going to cascade throughout the state. And then also for Alabama, keep in mind some of our best jobs are in healthcare. Our highest paying jobs, the best quality jobs in terms of benefits are in healthcare. So we're going to lose those as well. And it's going to be a quick spiral for our state. And it's just really unfortunate. So I hope that we can revisit this at some point again after we get the data and the results. But the budget is done. I just don't see where we're going to get $300 million. And speaking to some of our state representatives, it's going to have to be a cut. It's going to have to be a cut in services and access to healthcare for all of us.
Yeah, and just to get your broader perspective on the way in which healthcare should be run in America, what do you support as like a flagship policy? An expansion of the Affordable Care Act to, for instance, something that most states have already, which is an income threshold of 138% above the poverty level, which Alabama doesn't have, by the way, which is sort of making it a sore thumb.
Yeah.
So that's like the baseline. But then many other Democrats, they support a public option in terms of healthcare, and others support single payer healthcare. So what's your general view of how healthcare should be in the United States?
Well, this campaign is really about being pragmatic about where we are as a country. And I think it's positive. It's great to have kind of a North Star. And some people have very, very bold, ambitious ideas around what we're going to do with healthcare in the next 10, 20 years. I think this campaign is more about let's improve access at an effective cost. And that's going to take some time as well. But we can start with some simple things. For example, the threshold qualification you mentioned. We have a crisis in North Alabama where individuals are literally being arrested because they're going across the border to places like Tennessee. So just our direct north neighbor, they have more accessible health care. It's so difficult to even qualify for Medicaid, even in the state of Alabama. You have to be destitute to qualify here in the state. That's something we can do right away. And in terms of the big picture, single payer, all of that, I don't know if the country's there. I don't think we're going to get there in the next 10, 20 years. We have to look at it and make sure that it's ultimately feasible, cost effective. I think it's a great investment in our people ultimately. Why? Because preventive care ultimately reduces catastrophic care. A healthier population is going to deliver better for employers, and we're going to be more attractive to businesses that want to operate in the state. I think about businesses that we want to attract to Alabama. Why would you want to move here if you can't even get maternal care for your employees?
Yeah.
It's not a huge selling point, if you will. So I think the single payer is something we need to think about and move towards and make sure that it's cost effective and that we can implement it. I'd love to see some states actually experiment with that. That's a great opportunity, utilizing state rights, see if it works. We see it working in other countries.
Yeah, definitely. And Dakari, I just wanted to ask you one final question. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but Alabama in general is very unique in that most of it is rural. There's no real big big city other than Birmingham, obviously. And Alabama has faced issues that many other na states in the United States don't face. So I wanted to get a final message from you. What would you say to states like New York, Florida, California, who have these big cities who aren't really focused on the rural population? What would you say to them, when it comes to the issues that rural people face? How do you get attention directly to the rural Americans who are so desperately needing this attention?
Mhm. Well, first off, I just want to clarify a couple things. In the last couple of years, Birmingham has become the third largest city in the state, but the largest metro. So our metro here in Birmingham is about a million.
Hmm.
And our biggest state now, our biggest city that is Huntsville. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
the second biggest is Mobile. So it's very interesting. Um, but with all that said, yes, we are a state that has a huge rural population. About 70% of our state remains forested, which is a really beautiful thing. And I encourage everyone to come down and visit. It's a great, great state. But people in rural communities face a lot of challenges. I think about access to healthcare is the number one issue, jobs, infrastructure. So these are issues that we talk about every single day. In fact, there's going to be a demonstration down in South Alabama tomorrow around um, folks who don't even have proper septic treatment in their communities, things you don't think about in New York. So we do have some issues that we need to fund and work through collaboratively, both at the state level and federally. Um, but I also think about it like this. Folks speak so much around like GDP and per capita and economic output. We also are the states that feed the rest of the country. And there's a value in that. Um, Food security is national security. So Alabama produces corn, cotton, soybeans. This is important. Catfish, shrimp. So these are important things that we're able to do that city states like New York and maybe Massachusetts don't. We all contribute to this whole American experience.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dakari. It's always a pleasure to have you on, and thank you for joining our show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity, and you all have a good day.
So, we just got off the phone with Dakari, and truly just a wonderful interview. Very few Democrats are willing to speak with us about certain issues. So, Ofer, what are your first initial thoughts of that?
Well, I can't really say I'm surprised about the angle that he went through in pursuing certain answers, whether it be education, healthcare, crime. It's a way of appealing to the vast majority of Alabamians, people who are conservative minded, registered members of the Republican Party. So it's completely understandable why he's trying to appeal to those voters and find common ground, but also trying to have a bit of leeway, meaning he's going to leave the door open for other states to like experiment with their own policies. So that way he doesn't have to necessarily like have one certain position that encompasses the entire country. He can let other states experiment, and then that way he doesn't have to be pinned down and like give one specific answer, which is like an understandable position if you're believing in state rights.
Yeah, and I wanted to get your thoughts on his specific policies. So I'm going to start off
Mhm.
with police reform. He obviously has a personal aspect of his why he is, so pro reforming police. Do you have any thoughts on his policies regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, looking at his campaign platform and his answers, he talked about reducing qualified immunity, reducing the sort of benefits that obtains legally for law enforcement. That's a big deal because it affects his own case actually, because it's why it was initially thrown out. He talked about other issues that are sort of peripheral, like Glock switches, which basically turns a Glock from semi-automatic to an automatic gun. And he talked about generally actually supporting police. He didn't necessarily say he wants to support defunding the police, but he did say that he wants to redirect some of the duties of police to mental health officers in case they would be better suited in dealing with them. So in a roundabout way, it sort of like drains the resources in that
Yeah,
regard, but you could also argue that it sort of concentrates resources on violent crime.
yeah.
So that's his stance on policing. It's very similar to like what Wes Moore would say or any other one of these like moderate Democrats from, conservative areas would say.
Exactly. And I think it's important to mention that uh at least I don't know what his exact perspective, because we didn't go deep into this, but if we're going to defer health to like mental health cases that involve police to mental health care professionals. That may be an okay option in some cases, but obviously when we get into the violent cases and everything like that, which is the majority of cases
Yeah.
where police are called, we're going to have some issues with that. Um, Obvious issues, which I'm sure he understands. I also want to mention that the immunity that he mentioned that he would like to take away parts of it. In my opinion, that would be catastrophic for the police force of America. I believe that the reason why police are able to carry out any sort of, law enforcement duties is because they have immunity to a certain extent. Not only that, but also if we take that away, then the police would effectively turn into police that are not policing anymore, but are policing themselves to make sure that they are not, conducting anything that could be deemed as, you know, under the unimmune side of things. So I actually am a supporter of more immunity for police officers because they deal with so much. I wanted to get your thoughts over.
I concur. And actually, one of the best ways that we've been able to offset the sort of negative sides of protecting police is the fact that we now have body cameras on
Yeah.
police officers. So anything that will like viscerally, like for the average human being, look like it's unfair treatment of a criminal. Like now the police know that they have a body camera that can be released to the public and they're going to be more likely to refrain from certain activities. Now, taking away legal protections, that's a concerning thing because when you're in the heat of the moment, there really isn't enough time to like be micromanaging the way in which you respond to sometimes life or death situations. So it's completely reasonable that within the context of one of those like altercations, the police could go a little bit over what's permissible according to standards or according to the law. And if that becomes like a sticking point and they get targeted for it, then it's going to create a culture of fear. And then it's actually going to lead to a lot of danger for citizens because they're not going to be protected as well. So that's a huge issue. And one more point is that the police unions, ironically, are the ones that have been pushing for qualified immunity to stay in place. So, in one instance, actually, on the political spectrum, the left is actually opposed to unions in only this instance. But on everything else, the unions are completely fine and their collective bargaining is totally okay. So, that's interesting as well.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a very good point there. And also, I think it's important to mention that America, especially in the last 4 years, has faced so many conflicts with police officers. Police officers have been hated by so many Americans, especially after the events of George Floyd. It seems as if you want to become a police officer in this country, why? Why do it? There's no benefit to it because they're just being targeted so much. So taking away any protections from police officers, which are the people who are defending our nation, not all of them are good. Of course, there's police officers that are not, not perfect in their field as there is in any other field, but we can't be taking away their immunity protections just because of an incident that occurred or something like that. And to move on, I want to go into Google censorship. So Dakari has discussed about his personal experiences with Google censorship and his website being censored as a Democrat in a very, very pro right-leaning state, a Republican state. Ofer, you have some very interesting thoughts of this. I wanted to hear them.
Well, the Kari himself also acknowledged that the reason why his campaign and anything associated with it isn't really at the front page is because there simply isn't enough interest. And that's not really a slight or anything, because that's just the fact of the matter for Republican leading states of that sort. In Alabama, any sort of Democrat that starts a campaign without any name recognition is just naturally not going to have any attention. They need to build it up from the get-go. So maybe his position, and I think that's what he was alluding to, is that like any sort of politically related campaign or movement should be at the top of the search list because that just like helps increase awareness for our democracy. So perhaps that's his sort of angle, but it also does mean that he has a lot of work to do in order to translate like the current situation and improve it online, which he's doing with these interviews, and then also continue to do the field work on the ground in order to increase his name recognition and break through the barrier and the stigma of having a D next to his name on the ballots. And it's actually possible because this Senate race is open, as in the current
Yeah.
senator is not running for re-election. Tommy Tuberville, he's running for governorship, actually. So there is an open race, and if an elite candidate does not join in, then it probably will be against the current attorney general. And in recent years, within the past 10 years, there actually has been a Democrat senator in Alabama. So there is still a pathway that's feasible for him to get in.
I agree with you. And do you think that this general issue is because of Google? Is Google censoring his page, or is it just generally because the page is not viewed or there's no interest in Alabama for it?
Well, first of all, there's not much interest in Alabama in general, like within the entire context of the United States. And then within Alabama, even if his page was boosted to the front, because of his political affiliation, it's very likely that it wouldn't get that
Yeah.
much traffic, but it would obviously help a little bit. Why is Google doing it? For profit? Like you said, obviously, Google doesn't have a vested interest in like suppressing Democrats in Alabama, for instance, or in any other state for that matter. In fact, most of their bias has been directed towards conservative outlets, and this is not related to elections. This is related to just like political articles. They always have a mainstream media source that usually leans leftwards at the
Yes.
top of search engines and search results when we're looking at like a major issue, whether it be policing or breaking news, climate change. They're always at the top of that. And you have to go to like the fifth page, and then that's where you find the
Yes,
conservative
exactly.
oriented articles in their perspective.
Yeah, and to going a little bit deeper into that, because I write about this all the time,
Yeah.
Dr. Robert Epstein, who is not anything related to Jeffrey Epstein, Dr. Robert Epstein actually testified in front of Congress after he developed a report that was peer-reviewed at from the Harvard Research Center regarding specifically this, how conservatives are being censored on Google, how sites like the Gateway Pundit, Town Hall Media, the American Spectator, which are all sites that I actually write for, how they are being censored from Google's lists. And he testified in front of Congress. He gave a testimony. And what's very interesting is he is actually a Democrat. He supported Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. But even as a supporter of Hillary Clinton, he attested that because of this censorship, because of his research, Google was able to sway over 2.6 million votes for Hillary Clinton because of it. So this is a Democrat who voted for Hillary Clinton, saying that Google censorship resulted in a 2.6 million swing toward Hillary Clinton. Ofer, I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, naturally, you talked about it when you were asking him the questions. The fact that the vast majority of the attention and the utilization of search engines is via Google. So people are using it. And then when they're going to search and ask for a certain question about what a policy, like what a good prescription for a policy is, then the first results are going to be something left leaning and it's going to be associated with the Democratic candidate. So you could easily see how that translates into votes. And that's most important in swing states where a couple of thousand people who, they're just doing some surface level research because they're undecided, like they would look at that and then they would be swayed one way or the other. And definitely that plays a role in changing the electoral count and getting
Yeah.
certain people elected. So it's a very important issue. We need to scrutinize their algorithm and the way in which they decide whether something gets put at the top or gets pushed back. And that's why the company that you're raising up is actually a very good way to put pressure on Google, and it's a good alternative.
Yeah, the company he's referring to is named Luxel. Luxel is a search engine that does the exact opposite of what Google does. So just ranks pages based on their page views. And there's a conservative toggle or a left-leaning toggle that you can actually choose. I'm a very close supporter of Luxel. I have been supporting them from the very beginning. What they are doing can truly change the votes for millions of people, as Dr. Epstein has stated. But I want to go back to the 2.6 million points. This is coming from a Democrat. And I'll attach the article where you can find all of the sourcing for this that I actually wrote. This is coming from a Democrat that 2.6 million votes for Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. I mean, this goes into so many other elections. And what I wanted to ask over, do you think that the results of the elections, not only the 2016 one, but in the 2021, in the 2024 one, and not only for federal elections, also for state governorial elections, gubernatorial elections, sorry, and even the mayoral election in New York City. Do you think that Google has an effect on them?
Yeah, it can't not have an effect because of how influential it is.
Yeah.
Like, if you're undecided and you have 40% of the country that's not registered with either political party and identifies as independent, when they go out and vote and they don't necessarily know how they're gonna like look for somebody, the obvious medium to research or even like get to the website is through Google. So then like regardless of where you're starting, you always like reach it at some point. So
Yeah.
that's why we need to have so much scrutiny on Google. And yes, that 2.6 million number, that's certainly something that's plausible. So yeah, it's a huge issue.
Yeah, I mean, and no politician discusses this. It's not discussed anywhere in the media. My op-ed in the Hill will discuss this in a few days. It's going to be published, but
Ooh, of
really, this is yeah. I'll share it as soon as
course.
it's published. But it's not discussed anywhere, and that's because politicians are also afraid. They're afraid that if they come out to companies like Google, who has a complete monopoly over the search engine system, then they will be either blacklisted, which has happened in the past. It happened with the Gateway Pundit. It happened with the Western Journal, the Breitbart. It happened with so many of these, these newspapers that spoke out against this obvious bias. So I want to see how it continues. I think the Trump administration, they have been taking action against bias like this. I hope they take action against Google. And going into that, Dakarai brought up a very interesting point about NPR and PBS, and he mentioned how NPR, in his perspective from his research, is not biased. Ofer, I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, the issue is, and people cite this a lot, they look at certain aggregators that like take all the various companies and put them on the political spectrum from right to left. And you already know it's skewed because the middle includes those sort of companies or those nonprofits in NPR's case straight in the middle. So then everything is slightly skewed as a result because NPR, you look at the people that work there, like the employees that are writing for the editorial board, that are even writing the general news articles. You look at their political affiliations via Twitter. You look at the sort of stories that they've been running over the past couple of years, running cover for Joe Biden when he was president, but then trying to subvert Trump's legacy every single moment that they get. They are certainly not, they're certainly biased. And they're even more biased on radio. Like if you ever turn on their radio program in the car, like
Oh
you'll
my God.
notice that it's so partisan in the way that they frame every single issue. And because they're considered mainstream media, maybe that creates the allure or the perception that they are the middle or the mainstream. But that's obviously not the case. If they were to be unbiased, then they would just present everything as like this side has this argument, this side has the other argument, and then they wouldn't like do any sort of like commentary of their own. But that's
Yeah.
not what they're doing right now. They're giving their own opinions, and the worst thing they're doing is presenting a story as if it's a fact, but then putting in their own bias into it. That's the most dangerous because it looks like it's fair.
Yeah, exactly. And this goes into Israel, obviously, too, because their coverage on Israel has been anything but fair. They have claimed that, 50, I mean, they have claimed that the situation in Israel is a famine. I mean, sorry, in Gaza is a famine, and the IDF is to blame for it. I have articles related to this. I'll attach it also below, one in Town Hall Media that I'm thinking of. And their framing of the entire situation was ridiculous. They actually interviewed a Hamas spokesperson and put it in there as if it's a fact a day after what the October 7th massacre. And when we have these sort of things in our mainstream news that the government is funding, no wonder Trump is going to defund it. Well, obviously he would. And I would even say that even if we're funding the Wall Street Journal, we should defund that too. Because any state-run media in any sort, if the government is giving any money towards media or press, that is already slope waiting to happen. There's going to be a failure there. We cannot have funding come from the federal government into our media. It's the core principle of our democracy. Yeah.
Yep. And there are many other issues that were discussed during the interview. I think that one of the more interesting ones is in relation to charter schools because he does have a perspective on it that sort of bucks Democrat orthodoxy because he learned at a magnet school that's actually pretty elite for the States. So he was able to get an understanding of what it's like to learn in a sort of school that doesn't follow the exact same curriculum as most mainstream public schools. So he gets the fact that students can benefit from different types of formulas. So then I asked him about like his view on school choice, on the existence of charter schools, and his answer is interesting. Basically, what he's saying is that there should be some sort of baseline
Yeah.
wherein each public school in a certain district does have enough money to sustain itself. And then, as sort of like an ancillary to that, or some sort of like supplementary program, there should be a way to have the state subsidize like a voucher to get into a charter school, to get into a magnet school would actually be a public school, but just a specialized one. But charter schools, for instance, homeschooling is another option. Everything that falls under that education umbrella. But he said that would be something that's like ancillary to it. But he said that like for the most part, he wants to focus on strengthening public schools, which is a huge issue in Alabama, obviously, wherein they're spending less, significantly less per pupil than the national average, which is also like lower than many other states like New York, as we talked about. But we also have other issues in Alabama in relation to the amount of the class sizes. Like the class sizes are
Yeah.
huge, especially in the urban areas in the states. Not many good teachers are in the urban or rural areas for that matter. Transportation is another huge issue related to that. And for jobs in general, access to moving from one place to another in Alabama is very difficult from a rural standpoint.
Yeah.
But to get back to the argument, is the fact that the public school system in Alabama right now is failing their students, and definitely new options should be opened up. And I am happy that at the very least he was able to like keep an open mind and pledge to support it to a certain degree. And I hope that it will become more mainstream. Like Josh Shapiro, for instance, I think you mentioned this in one of your articles. He also is pretty open to that
Very
perspective,
open. Yeah.
although it didn't pass in the legislature, but that is a big shift that's going on right now.
Exactly.
So talk about Josh Shapiro, for instance, in his
Yeah,
stance.
I want to bring up actually Josh Shapiro and other states that have school choice that are also rural, like Alabama. So Louisiana, for instance, which is not as rural, but still very, has a very rural ba basis. I recently interviewed the former superintendent of, or assistant superintendent of the Louisiana Department of Education. And after Hurricane Katrina, which devastated Louisiana as a whole, where almost everything got knocked down, the whole entire state faced a huge issue with it. The main city of Louisiana, New Orleans, they actually implemented a school choice policy. So there was a full school choice policy, which completely revolutionized its education. It went from one of the worst education in the entire country to a state with relatively good education and a state that actually gives students what they need with a significantly smaller amount of funding than states like New York. So it completely revolutionized that. And the fact is that in rural districts, in rural schools, everything like that, that is where school choice does the best. It will close down bad public schools that maybe won their state championship in 1977 for, I don't know, wiffle ball or something. And now it will open up a charter school, which is actually going to be funded 10 to 20% less than that public school and provide much better education for those rural students. That's what needs to be implemented in Alabama and all other rural states. That's what I think Dakarai needs to do. He needs to support that exact issue. And the fact that he is not is a little bit concerning to me. But at least, again, as you said, he has an open mind, which many other Democrats do not. However, there's Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. He also has a very open mind. He's, again, a moderate Democrat that isn't considered very hard left-leaning, even less left-leaning than Democratic nominee in the 2020 election, Kamala Harris. And that's a reason why she didn't pick Josh Shapiro at the end. And he has a stance of charter schools. He promoted it and he thought that they were a good option and he still promotes it. However, the state legislator was too left-leaning to let that pass. So that resulted in nothing. But what we are seeing is a transition. We are seeing a transition of Democrats supporting school choice policies and accepting that it may be the right move. I'm going to, this isn't confirmed yet, but I'm hopefully going to have an article in Reason magazine in a few weeks discussing this exact issue, how Eric Adams, at the very beginning of his campaign, painted himself as a moderate Democrat that supported school choice vouchers, but in his actual term, he ended up not really supporting them. So which is a little bit concerning. But my main point to all of this is that we are seeing a transition in the moderate Democratic Party that is open to school choice. And that is good. That is positive. We see states like Louisiana, even cities in New York that have immensely benefited from school choice. And I want to see that. I want to see growth on that in those factors. Now, moving a little bit on from, charter schools, it seems like that's all we talk about in our podcasts because it's a very
Yeah.
issue. I wanted to ask you about what you thought of his response when I asked him about NYC Democratic mayoral nominee Zohran Mamdani. He said that he's open to his ideas. He doesn't know how well they're going to work, but he's open to trying them out. I first want to ask you what you think of that. Now, next, I want to ask you what you think of his self-described partnership or meetings with the Democratic Socialists of America later on in his campaign. I wanted to ask you about that.
Mm. Yeah, sure. So he's trying not to rock the boat by basically leaving all options open. He wants to create a big tent because already he's at a disadvantage by being a Democrat in
Yeah,
Alabama. So you don't want to alienate the Democrat base, which some of them, even in Alabama, do subscribe to similar beliefs as Mamdani. So you don't want to go out and just like castigate him. So his way of sort of going about round about it is giving his sort of moderate stance on the issue, but then saying that, depending on the location or the size of a state, the density of it, or whether it's urban or rural, like certain policies could work in one area and not work in the other. And that's a part of just the way in which our system runs with the 50 states. So he did that with Mamdani and like he gave examples of where he might be able to sympathize with him in areas where they disagree. Like he talked about free bus rides, and I actually think that he should have mentioned the way in which transportation is an issue in Alabama because it certainly is. So
yeah,
that's something that, we could all find common ground with him on that. We could also look at the way in which he talked about grocery stores, the way that he disagreed with the idea of opening up these sort of state-run grocery stores. I think that he, as a person who worked in business for a long time, can understand the issues with creating push and pull factors that sort of like get people to leave states. So that's why I think he's more wary of some of the more radical, some of the more Bill de Blasio-esque policies that are being mentioned by Mamdani's campaign. And in regards to the collaboration with the DSA, I think it's similar to what I said before. He has to work with anybody who he has available to him. And the DSA, they're very good with field work. I don't know what his ground game is. He personally is visiting a lot of areas to his credit, especially in northern Alabama near Huntsville. The problem is one person alone, the candidate can't actually spread the word
I
that
agree.
far, that efficiently. You need a very good ground game. That's what Mamdani did. I think that is what he wants to replicate, but he needs to get a base that will actually be willing to do it for him. And the DSA would if he's like willing to give them some sort of like reason to do so. And if he's gonna like speak out against them or speak out against Mamdani, then why would they even go about doing that? So he needs an activist class to help him out. And then maybe he would have a shot at, first of all, winning the primary, which I think he's the most favored right now based on the
By
candidates.
far.
Yes. And then actually going into the general and like taking advantage of the fact that this is an open seat. Tommy Tuberville running for governor is not going to be running for Senate, obviously. So he's going to try to capitalize on that, of course.
Yeah. And just to quickly share my screen to discuss an event, actually, I wanted to open my screen up to one of the events I will be speaking at this week with Brandon Stark. We are going to be rallying against Mamdani on Sunday, July 27th, in just 2 days in Union Square Park. And you can see I'm speaking with a few other people, including the former Lieutenant Governor of New York. And there we're going to be showing that Mamdani's policies are going to hurt all New Yorkers, not just Jews, not just people who support Israel, but New Yorkers who have children in charter schools, New Yorkers who rely on school vouchers, who want to see an economic boom in their city, who want to see their rent prices actually going down instead of being frozen and landlords developing outside of New York. So this is what we're going to be discussing. If you can join us, please do. It will be a wonderful event. I'll link the link to the registration in below. And Ofra, was also invited to speak. However, due to his presence outside of the country at this moment, he is not able to. I just wanted to share share this event. It will be wonderful. But moving on, I want to ask Ofer another question about his about our interview with Dakarai, and that is his perspective on healthcare and the Big Beautiful Bill. He mentioned that $300 million will be cut in Alabama funding because of the Big Beautiful Bill, which Personally, I'm a little bit questionable. The Big Beautiful Bill, questionable too. The Big Beautiful Bill takes out zero funding for Medicare. It doesn't even touch $1 of it. And for Medicaid, it doesn't cut any money other than just setting a work requirement and some other factors that will decrease the funding, but not for reasons just to cut funding, if that makes sense. It will decrease the funding for illegal immigrants who are currently on Medicaid, which is the reality, and a few other things. Ofer, I wanted to get your perspective. Is this $300 million cut real? What is the impact going to be?
Look, it probably would cut that amount if the people that are receiving the cuts, like that will no longer receive the benefits, decide to remain unemployed, right? Like if you're
Of
not going to find
course.
employment, then yeah, there's going to be a $300 million cuts. That's the entire point of the policy, right? So there's a debate about the merits of that. Like you could say, okay, what if somebody's actively seeking employment but they're not finding it? Like should they
That's a
have that
provision in the
cut?
Big Beautiful Bill. I read it.
Yeah. Wait, talk about it for a
Yeah,
moment.
that's a provision. I read the entire thing. It took me
Mm.
months to read, and actually, like probably a month to read the entire thing. And
Wow.
much of it is fluff, by the way. There's a 47 dumbed down version. Just read it. That's all you need. But the Big Beautiful Bill has exact measures for that. So if you are seeking employment, if you're volunteering, if you're in community service, then there's provisions for that. So really, if you're doing anything with your time for 80 hours a month, then you're fine. And just to give you a perspective of what 80 hours a month really is, 80 hours a month is half of the time the average American works. The average American works around 160 hours a month, which is around an 8-hour workday. And 80-hour a month, thing is nothing. If you're poor, if you have no money, then you should be working more than that. You should be working more than the average American. Also, the Big Beautiful Bill has specific provisions excusing if you have a dependent. If you have a dependent, you do not have to have this work requirement. If you are sick, if you are going through any treatments, anything like that, surgeries, if you're recovering. So basically, if you're anything but a fully single able-bodied working American, you are not required to this work requirement. And if you are an able-bodied work American, you're required to work half as much as the average American works. So I'm not understanding the disconnect. Why is this bad? Why?
It's because of the optics of, the way in which the bill passed, which is the fact that on one hand, they renewed the 2017 tax cuts, which give corporate taxes, they lowered the income tax on high earners. And then at the same time, like cutting the healthcare benefits, but obviously that leaves out the obvious context that is, for the most part, people are going to be safe as long as they fit the criteria they discussed, which is very broad. The only reason
Too
why they
broad,
even
way
added
too
in
broad.
these, yes, and the reason why they added it in and refused to cut it more is because they needed to find a way to like fudge the numbers with the CBO to make it look like there's going to be enough of a saving cut because they needed to have it such that there isn't a like passing over the debt ceiling. So they need to like fluff the numbers to make it look like, okay, we're cutting this, and that way the bill can pass and fits the budget reconciliation, like basically terms. But maybe in reality, it's going to be a bit more than that because for the most part, those cuts won't really affect the vast majority of Alabamians. But uh, you know, when we look at healthcare in Alabama specifically, it is a huge issue.
Hmm.
It's a huge issue for rural areas, especially where the rates of patients to physicians is extremely high, one of the highest in the nations, which means that you have like in certain areas just one single doctor who's treating thousands of patients.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely insane. It's unsustainable. A lot of these areas have older populations on average, so they absolutely need healthcare investments and they need to build up the hospitals to improve the facilities. But there's also an issue in coverage because let's say you're making a bit over the poverty line, like you're working in retail, you're working in something like agriculture, you're making a bit more than the poverty line, but you're not making that much more. In that case, you're not qualifying for the Affordable Care Act benefits of like being a sole proprietor or being a part of the ACA marketplace. So then you fall through the cracks basically. So you're not only not receiving basically welfare, but you're not wealthy on your own. So that's something that he acknowledged,
Yeah.
Dakarai, and he did say that, like as a baseline, he definitely does support raising just like most states, 40 other states have done this already, raising the ACA benefits, the Obamacare benefits
Yeah.
to people that make 138% above the poverty line. So that's the baseline. And he didn't really say much about whether he supports a public option or single payer.
Yeah, and to reference, I don't think this is an issue with the Big Beautiful Bill. I think that this is more
Yeah.
of a state issue because, again, Alabama is very unique in that most of its population, or a very big part of its population, is in rural communities that are being treated by doctors along with thousands of other patients. So it's a state issue that Alabama needs to fix. It's not a federal issue. How they're going to fix it, that's up to the state. It's not up to Donald Trump. But the Big Beautiful Bill definitely does not hinder them from fixing this issue. However,
Yeah.
what Alabama had, what we have to understand about Alabama in general is that it has very little funding. It is one of the poorest states in the United States, and that is a big issue. And I want to bring salt tax into here because salt tax, state deduction, tax. Let me just quickly explain what it is because a lot of people think it's tax on salt. No, salt tax is the idea that after you pay state tax, you pay your federal tax. So you're paying a lower amount of federal tax than you are in state tax. So if New York, let's say, charges 17% and I make $100,000 a year, I'm first paying 17% on $100,000 a year. And then on whatever that amount is, I'm paying in federal tax. So it's much less. And the Big Beautiful Bill actually raises the salt cap, which was lowered to $10,000 in Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It raises it to $40,000. And as you can imagine, the main people who are benefiting from this are states like New York, California, who have extremely high income taxes, like 17%. And that's why people like Mike Lawler, who we will hopefully have on the show, and I have previously interviewed in other articles, he really advocated for a salt tax because it helped his district. But Alabama is a state that actually got hurt from salt tax because it meant that red states would have to pay more in taxes than the average liberal state. So, how do you think that this raise in salt tax, in the salt tax cap, how do you think that would affect red states like Alabama?
Well, I can understand why these more red-leaning states, the ones that are less urban in nature, the ones that have less state and local taxes, like they're going to feel slighted by this because there's no way in which they can receive the same level of benefits. They're not getting the same percentage cuts as a result. When you look at it though, and this is what like people from New York and California are going to say, they're going to claim that because they pay more through federal taxes, then that goes into welfare that on average goes more so to those red states, to rural states, to poorer states, all across the Bible Belt, as it's called in the southern parts of the United States, and then also in Middle America, the Rockies, the Great Plains, that entire part of the United States in the Northwest,
Yeah.
which is more so Republican and it's more it has higher poverty rate in general. So they're receiving more when it comes to Medicare, Medicaid, um, food stamps, WIC, all those programs, like proportionally to Democrat states and to these sort of coastal states like California, New York. So that would be the argument from the left that okay, we're funding your sort of subsidies, so you know you should be grateful for what you're receiving already.
Yeah, and that's a very stupid argument. I think this is very easily debunked by the fact that number one, the United States is a union, so we help out every state no matter what. So that's argument number one. Number two is there's two different issues here. There's federal and a state issue. So the state issue is how much the state is taxing their citizens. The federal issue is how much welfare the federal government is going to be allocating towards the states. So you can't combine those two issues because when you start combining them, it turns into its own separate issue. So if they
Yeah.
admit that it's not fair, let's say every state was getting the same amount of welfare, if they admit that that wasn't fair in that case scenario, then it's very easy to say that, okay, then it's not fair in this case scenario right now because the federal government chooses who gets the welfare. It's not the states. that choose who gets the
Mhm.
welfare. So
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense. I'm a big advocate to lower the SALT cap. I think that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, when it did that, it was revolutionary. And by the way, I directly was negatively affected by it, and my entire community was. But it was a wonderful move, and I think that the biggest mistake of the entire beautiful bill, which is pretty beautiful overall, is that they raised the SALT cap. It really is going to increase our debt, and it just does not help the situation at all right now.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of maturity to like step out of your own interests and like understand what's best for all Americans. So I respect that. That's a good
I'm
thing.
not paying taxes yet. It's so far not me, so
Yeah.
it's my family. But I understand.
Maybe it'll change your mind once you feel it. The
Yeah,
insane
maybe.
taxes in New York. It's
Yeah.
just, yeah,
I am moving out of New York as soon as possible. Florida, here I come. Which is actually pretty funny that I bring that up because Florida is about to get a big boost in its economy if Mamdani wins. A big, big,
yeah.
big boost. It's about to turn into probably the economic capital of the United States. And I attest that a lot to a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful governor, Ron DeSantis, who has done
Yeah.
wonderful things for Florida. He is one of my favorite governors right now. He completely changed Florida from a state that was poor, half Democrat, half Republican state, to a state that right now is not a swing state anymore. It's fully red and really prosperous. So I attest a lot of the success that they are getting to Ron DeSantis, which you can have his opinions on him, whatever, it doesn't matter. What he has done for Florida is great. And what I find also interesting though is that Dakarai this is from a different interview, so we didn't discuss this here, but Dakarai does not support lowering the salt cap. He actually supports raising it. Do you think that's more because
Interesting.
he's just a Democrat and he has to say that, or because he actually understands that it hurts liberal states?
I'm honestly not sure. I would like to get his view on it because you could surmise that as a person from Alabama, he would want it to be lowered,
Yeah.
as would the vast majority of representatives, elected officials from all southern states, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, etc., because they want higher revenue from the federal government and then goes to them to benefit them. And that would sort of get tied into any sort of healthcare benefits that like those states can get, basically,
Yeah,
from Medicare, Medicaid. That would be directly funded through a reduction in the amount that they can deduct of those liberals from those
exactly.
blue leaning states. So I'm not sure. I would have to ask him.
Yeah, and something else I found interesting in our interview, this is going to be my final or our final point about this interview, which by the way,
Yeah,
if Dakari is watching this, I want to thank him. It was
absolutely.
a
Yeah,
double interview, one of the most interesting I have ever conducted.
yeah.
And thank you so much. He gave us, full he gave us full trust to share his views on our channel. So it's wonderful. I really enjoyed it, and I know Wilford did too. And
Yeah.
finally, he discussed an issue in rural America where we have situations in which people are A, not getting any health care, they are B, not having proper education, and overall just failing as a society. He brought up an example of septic systems. I feel as if the entirety of America, since we mostly live in metropolitan areas, we do not understand what rural Americans face on a day-to-day basis, and they are ignored. Ofer, what do you say to that? Do you think that the Trump administration is taking adequate care of rural America? Should they be taking more care? What should be going on there?
There has to be more attention looked at certain issues that affect rural America, which is about 20% of the country. In Alabama, it's 40%. So you can understand why it would be so
Yeah,
pertinent to the Kari. So you look at like the whole host of issues. Healthcare is a big one. The fact that there aren't that many hospitals and a lot of them are actually getting shut down. The quality's lower, the facilities are worse, the ratios are bad. So that's one perspective. Education's poor, as we looked at beforehand. Transportation is difficult. There's actually an issue with broadband access. So a lot of these areas don't have the best stable connection. About 70% of the rural areas in Alabama actually do have steady flowing broadband access, which is absolutely crazy for 2025, like in the modern age. 30%
we
of
need
the states
Starlink.
in yeah, exactly. We got to send in Starlink from Ukraine to rural Alabama actually to help out. So That's another concerning issue. All in all, because of the fact that it is farther away from like main hubs and main like centers and services, they naturally fall through the cracks. So there has to be a level of like federal involvement to help out as well, because a lot of these state budgets are already spread out thin. I know in Alabama it is with the current governor. I think her name is Kay Ivey. When her budgets, like they're definitely not like trying to increase it anymore already. Like their tax, basically earnings are very low because the taxes in general are low in Alabama, so they don't have enough to invest. So yes, it has to come from the federal government. And I would say number one, you have to fix those like life-threatening issues. If there's an issue with contamination in a septic tank, that could threaten all the water system for these communities, and they rely on centralized ones. So that has to be fixed, obviously. Like it was fixed in Flint, Michigan after a very long time.
Yeah.
Horrible
And
incident
yeah,
there. That was really bad. I mean,
yeah, that was horrible. And even after like it was quote unquote resolved for years, there were still issues with sanitation in the
yeah.
States.
And for
Yeah.
for reference, Flint, Michigan right now is the poorest city in the entire United States. It earns the least amount of income
Oh,
per capita. So it's very sad. I mean, what they have been through, they have been neglected by the government. I actually think that the policies that we saw under the Trump administration so far have been very favorable towards, the rural America. We discussed in our last podcast about the trade deal with Japan, and we saw that Trump has put an emphasis on making sure farmers are benefiting from these types of deals. So I want to see more of that. I know the Trump administration will do it. I know Republicans are backing our rural Americans, and I hope that in 2 years the situation will be very different and rural Americans are no longer neglected. Yeah.
yeah, certainly.
And thank you guys so much for listening to our show. We absolutely loved our interview with Dakari. It was one of the best experiences we ever had. So thank you and stay tuned. If you guys could join my rally, please do. And if you can't, we'll be filming a video very, very soon with some very other special guests. You can only imagine. It's only up from here. So thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful weekend. Over.
Yes, thank you guys so much. Wonderful interview, first of many, hopefully. And obviously, watch the rally, support the rally, get the clips afterwards.
It's gonna
We're
be a
all
couple
rooting for you.
guys. Yeah, okay.